I never thought I would become the guy who installed security cameras to catch criminals. But when you are paying $600 a month in HOA fees and cannot find parking in your own community, you start asking questions. My name is Marcus Chen, and I live in Riverside Meadows, a townhome community in Gilbert, Arizona. The place looks nice enough from the outside with its manicured lawns and Spanish-style architecture. But underneath, that pleasant exterior was something rotten. I had been living there for 3 years, working as a software engineer from home, and for the most part, things were fine. The HOA was always a bit pushy about minor violations like leaving your trash cans out too long or having the wrong shade of beige on your window curtains, but nothing too crazy. That changed about 8 months ago when the parking situation went from manageable to absolutely insane. Our community had assigned parking spots for each unit, plus guest parking scattered throughout the complex. I had 2 assigned spots right in front of my townhome, which was perfect since I had my car and my girlfriend Sarah often stayed over with hers. The guest parking was always available for friends or family who visited. Then suddenly, around last September, I started noticing my assigned spots were taken. Not occasionally, but almost every single day. The first few times it happened, I figured it was just inconsiderate neighbors or their guests who did not pay attention to the numbers painted on the asphalt. I left polite notes on windshields asking people not to park in my spots. The notes were ignored. I contacted the HOA management company, and they sent out a generic email reminder about respecting assigned parking. Nothing changed. In fact, it got worse. By October, I was parking 3 or 4 blocks away from my own home almost every night. I would come back from the grocery store with bags of food and have to haul them a quarter mile because both my spots were taken. Sarah stopped coming over as much because she was tired of the parking nightmare. I was paying a premium to live in this community, and I could not even park at my own house. What really got my attention was the cars themselves. They were not beater vehicles that looked like they belonged to broke college kids visiting friends. These were nice cars, newer models, luxury sedans, and SUVs. And they were there all day, sometimes for multiple days in a row. I started taking note of license plates and realized these were not even residents. The same vehicles kept appearing, using the same spots day after day, like they had some kind of arrangement. I brought this up at the monthly HOA board meeting in November. There were about 15 residents there, which was actually a good turnout for our community of 200 units. The board president, a woman named Patricia Donnelly, sat at the head table with her reading glasses perched on her nose, looking like she would rather be anywhere else. Patricia was exactly what you would picture when someone says HOA president. She was in her mid-50s, had that specific haircut that somehow all women in positions of minor authority seem to have, and wore pearl necklaces even to casual meetings. Sitting next to her was the vice president, Karen Mitchell, who was somehow even more intense than Patricia. Karen was probably 50, always dressed like she was going to a country club, and had this way of looking at you like you had personally insulted her grandmother. When I raised my hand during the open forum portion of the meeting, Patricia acknowledged me with a tight smile that did not reach her eyes. "Yes, Marcus, what is your concern?" she asked, her voice dripping with the kind of false patience that made it clear she viewed resident input as an annoying obligation. "I wanted to talk about the parking situation," I said, standing up so everyone could hear me. "My assigned spots have been taken almost every day for the past 2 months. I have talked to other residents, and they are experiencing the same thing. There are cars that clearly do not belong to residents taking up both assigned and guest parking." "What is the board doing about this?" Karen leaned forward, her face already contorting into that expression. "You know the one." The expression that says she is about to explain something to you like you are a child who just does not understand how the world works. Marcus, we are aware of some parking issues and we are monitoring the situation, Karen said, her voice sharp. However, we cannot just go around towing vehicles without following proper protocol. There are legal considerations. We have to give warnings first, post notices, and follow a specific procedure. I understand that, I replied, trying to keep my tone respectful. But this has been going on for months. Have warnings been issued? Have any vehicles been towed? Because from where I am standing, nothing has changed. Patricia jumped in, clearly wanting to shut down this line of questioning. We have sent out community-wide emails and posted notices about parking violations. We are doing everything within our power and within the bounds of the law. Sometimes these things take time to resolve. But whose cars are they? I asked, pressing the issue. These are not residents. I have been tracking license plates. The same vehicles are here day after day. How is that even possible if you are monitoring the situation? The room had gone quiet. Other residents were nodding along, clearly interested in the answer. Patricia and Karen exchanged a glance and I saw something pass between them. It was quick, but it was there. A look that said they had not expected to be challenged quite so directly. We cannot discuss specific enforcement actions in a public meeting, Patricia said firmly. If you have concerns about particular vehicles, please submit them in writing to the management company and they will be addressed through the proper channels. That was it. Discussion over. Patricia moved on to the next agenda item, something about landscaping contracts, and I sat back down feeling frustrated but also suspicious. The way they had deflected, the look they had exchanged, it all felt off. I decided right then that I was going to figure out what was really going on. The next day, I went online and ordered 2 high-definition security cameras with night vision and motion detection. They were not cheap, around $300 each, but I was determined to document what was happening. When they arrived 3 days later, I spent an afternoon installing them. I mounted one camera under the eave of my townhome, angled to capture both of my assigned parking spots and part of the street. The second camera I placed on my back patio, which overlooked one of the guest parking areas that always seemed to be full. The cameras connected to an app on my phone and recorded continuously to a cloud storage service. I could watch the footage in real time or review recordings from any time in the past 30 days. It felt a bit ridiculous, like I was setting up a surveillance operation to catch international spies instead of just trying to figure out why I could not park at my own house. But I was past caring about looking paranoid. For the first few days, the cameras just confirmed what I already knew. Cars that did not belong to residents were parking in my spots and throughout the guest parking areas. They would arrive in the morning and stay all day, sometimes overnight. I started keeping a detailed log, noting license plates, makes, and models of vehicles, and exactly when they arrived and departed. Then, on the 4th day of recording, I caught something interesting. It was around 8 in the morning on a Tuesday, and I was drinking coffee while half watching the camera feed on my phone. A silver Honda Accord pulled up and parked in one of my assigned spots. A man in his 30s got out, wearing business casual clothes like he was heading to an office job. Nothing unusual so far. But then, as he was walking away from his car, Patricia Donnelly appeared on camera, walking up from the direction of the community clubhouse. I sat up straighter, watching closely. Patricia approached the man, and they had a brief conversation. I could not hear what they were saying because the cameras did not have audio, but I could see Patricia hand something to the man. It looked like a small card or piece of paper. The man pulled out his wallet and handed Patricia what was clearly cash. She counted it quickly, slipped it into her purse, and walked away. The whole interaction took less than 2 minutes. I rewound the footage and watched it again, making sure I was seeing what I thought I was seeing. There was no doubt. Patricia Donnelly, the HOA president, had just taken cash from someone in exchange for something related to parking. I saved the video clip and immediately started going through my archived footage from the previous days. Over the next several hours, I found 3 more similar interactions. In one, Karen Mitchell met a woman in the guest parking area and accepted cash. In another, Patricia was again visible, this time meeting someone near the mailboxes and conducting the same type of exchange. The third showed both Patricia and Karen together, meeting with 2 different people in the span of 30 minutes, both transactions involving cash. My heart was racing. This was not just a parking problem, this was an actual scheme. The HOA board was selling parking spots to outsiders for cash. That explained everything. The luxury cars, the same vehicles day after day, the board's complete lack of interest in solving the problem. They were the problem. They were making money off of resident parking while homeowners like me were forced to park blocks away from our own homes. I needed more evidence. What I had was damning, but I wanted to build an ironclad case before I made any moves. I also needed to understand the full scope of the operation. How many spots were they selling? How much money were they making? Who were these people parking in our community? Over the next 2 weeks, I became obsessed with the camera footage. I would check it multiple times a day, always looking for more transactions. I started recognizing patterns. Patricia usually handled the morning shift, meeting people between 7 and 9 in the morning. Karen covered the afternoons and evenings. They were running this operation like a business, with regular hours and reliable service. I also started following some of the cars that were parking in our community. I know that sounds creepy, but I was careful about it. One morning, I watched on my camera as a black BMW parked in one of the guest spots. The driver, a woman in her 40s, got out and walked toward the edge of our community. I grabbed my keys and followed her on foot, keeping my distance. She walked 3 blocks to a large office complex where several tech companies had their headquarters. She worked there. Our community was being used as overflow parking for nearby businesses. That made perfect sense. Commercial parking in Gilbert, especially near the downtown area where lots of companies were located, was expensive and limited. Our community was less than a 10-minute walk from several major office buildings. If you were an employee who did not want to pay for parking or deal with a crowded company lot, paying the HOA board $50 or $100 a month for a guaranteed spot in a quiet residential area would be a steal. I did the same thing with several other vehicles and confirmed the pattern. Every single car I followed went to a nearby business. These people were commuters who had somehow found out that our HOA board would rent them parking spots under the table for cash. By early December, I had compiled hours of footage showing Patricia and Karen conducting transactions. I had a spreadsheet with over 30 different license plates of vehicles that were clearly not residents, but parked in our community regularly. I had tracked at least 15 separate cash exchanges on camera. I also did some rough math. If they were renting out even 20 spots at $75 per month, that was $1,500 a month in untaxed, unreported cash income. Over the course of a year, that was $18,000, and I suspected they had way more than 20 spots rented out. The question was what to do with this information. I could go to the police, but I was not sure if what they were doing was actually illegal in a criminal sense, or just a violation of the HOA's own rules and fiduciary duty. I could bring it to the next board meeting and expose them publicly, but I worried they would just deny everything and then cover their tracks. I needed advice from someone who understood HOA law. I reached out to a real estate attorney named James Kowalski who had good reviews online, and offered free initial consultations. When I called his office, I explained the situation briefly, and his paralegal scheduled me for a meeting the following week. The wait was agonizing. Every day, I watched more cars take up resident parking, knowing that Patricia and Karen were pocketing cash while homeowners suffered. When I finally sat down in James Kowalski's office on a Tuesday afternoon, I brought my laptop with all the video evidence loaded and ready to show. James was in his early 40s, with a no-nonsense demeanor and the kind of confidence that comes from handling hundreds of similar cases. His office was in Scottsdale, about 30 minutes from my place, and it was decorated with framed degrees and certificates that covered nearly every inch of wall space. "So, Marcus, you mentioned on the phone that you have evidence of your HOA board engaging in some kind of parking scheme," James said, folding his hands on his desk. "Why don't you walk me through what you have discovered?" I opened my laptop and started showing him the footage. His expression remained neutral as he watched Patricia and Karen conducting their cash transactions, but I could see his eyes sharpening with interest. When I finished showing him about 5 minutes of compiled clips, he sat back in his chair and let out a low whistle. "This is pretty clear-cut," he said. "What they are doing is called self-dealing, and it is a serious breach of fiduciary duty. HOA board members are required to act in the best interest of the community, not to enrich themselves personally. By renting out common area parking for personal profit, they are violating both the HOA's governing documents and Arizona state law." "So it is illegal?" I asked, feeling a surge of vindication. "It is definitely illegal in a civil sense," James explained. "It could also potentially be criminal, depending on how much money we are talking about and whether they have been falsifying HOA financial records to hide the income. At minimum, this is fraud and theft. They are taking a community asset, the parking spaces, and converting it for personal gain. That is essentially stealing from the HOA. What should I do?" I asked. "I want them held accountable, but I also just want to be able to park at my own house again." James thought for a moment, tapping a pen against his desk. "Here is what I recommend. First, we need to formally request financial records from the HOA. As a homeowner, you have a legal right to inspect the association's books. We want to see if there is any indication that this parking income has been reported or if it is completely off the books. My guess is it is off the books, which makes this even more serious. Second, we should send a formal complaint to the management company that oversees your HOA. Even though Patricia and Karen are elected board members, the management company has a responsibility to investigate credible allegations of misconduct. We will include some of your video evidence with that complaint. Third, and this is the big one, we need to call for a special meeting of the homeowners to recall the board members. Under Arizona law and most HOA governing documents, residents have the right to remove board members for cause. What you have documented is absolutely cause for removal. And if none of that works?" I asked. "Then we file a lawsuit," James said simply. "We sue Patricia, Karen, and anyone else involved personally for breach of fiduciary duty, fraud, and conversion of HOA assets. We also file a complaint with the Arizona Department of Real Estate if the management company does not take appropriate action. But I think once we start making noise with the evidence you have, things are going to move quickly. People who engage in this kind of petty corruption usually fold when they are caught." I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. I finally had a plan. James agreed to take my case on a contingency basis, meaning he would not charge me upfront, but would take a percentage of any money recovered for the HOA. We spent another hour going over the details and crafting a strategy. The next day, James sent a formal letter to the HOA management company, Anderson Property Management, outlining the allegations and requesting an immediate investigation. He included several video clips showing the cash transactions. He also submitted a formal request for financial records, including bank statements, income and expense reports, and board meeting minutes for the past year. The response from Anderson Property Management was swift, but not in the way I had hoped. 2 days after James sent the letter, I received a certified letter at my home. It was from Patricia Donnelly, on official HOA letterhead, informing me that I was being fined $500 for installing security cameras without HOA approval. According to the letter, any external modifications to the townhomes, including the installation of security equipment, required written approval from the Architectural Review Committee. Since I had not submitted an application or received approval, I was in violation of the community's CC and Articles, the covenants, conditions, and restrictions that govern the HOA. I called James immediately, incredulous. "They are fining me for the cameras, are you kidding me?" James actually laughed. "This is good, Marcus, this is very good. It means they are panicking. They know you have them on video, and instead of addressing the actual issue, they are retaliating against you. That is illegal. You cannot punish a homeowner for reporting misconduct. This is textbook retaliation, and it is going to make our case even stronger." "So I do not have to pay the fine?" I asked. "Absolutely not. Do not pay a penny. I will send them a response explaining that any attempt to fine or otherwise retaliate against you will be considered further evidence of misconduct and will be included in our legal action." True to his word, James sent a blistering response letter that same day. He pointed out that my cameras were small, unobtrusive, and installed for legitimate security purposes. He also noted that the sudden enforcement of architectural rules against me, immediately after I reported the board's misconduct, was obvious retaliation and could subject the board members to personal liability. Things escalated from there. The following week, I received another letter, this time informing me that my HOA voting rights were being suspended pending an investigation into my alleged harassment of board members. Harassment. I had not harassed anyone. I had simply reported what I observed. James assured me that this too was retaliation and would be dealt with. Meanwhile, Anderson Property Management finally responded to our request for financial records. Their letter was a masterpiece of bureaucratic evasion. They claimed that some of the requested documents were not available because they were in storage, others were privileged or confidential, and still others would take weeks to compile. They offered to let me come to their office to review certain documents in person, but said I could not make copies or take photos. James was not having it. He sent another letter, this time citing the specific Arizona statutes that gave me an unconditional right to inspect and copy HOA records. He gave them a deadline of 5 business days to produce the documents or face a motion to compel in court. While all this legal back and forth was happening, I kept documenting. My cameras continued to record every transaction. By mid-December, I had footage of over 25 separate cash exchanges. I also started quietly talking to other residents, gauging their frustration with the parking situation and their willingness to support a recall of the board. What I found was that people were angry, really angry, but they were also scared. Patricia and Karen had been on the board for years, and they had a reputation for being vindictive. Several residents told me stories of being fined for minor violations after they had questioned the board or voted against something Patricia wanted. One woman, Maria Santos, who lived a few doors down from me, said she had been fined $200 for having a wreath on her door that was too large according to the HOA's holiday decoration guidelines. She was sure it was retaliation for complaining about the board's decision to raise HOA fees the previous year. Despite the fear, I found about 30 residents who were willing to support a recall. Under our HOA's bylaws, we needed signatures from 20% of homeowners to call a special meeting. With 200 units, that meant we needed 40 signatures. It was going to be close. I spent every evening for a week going door to door with a petition. I explained what I had discovered, showed some of the video evidence to people who were interested, and asked for their support. Most people were shocked. They had suspected something was off with the parking situation, but they had not imagined that the board was actually profiting from it. By December 20th, I had 43 signatures. It had taken hours of conversations, some arguments with residents who thought I was stirring up trouble, and one door literally slammed in my face by a guy who said he did not care about parking as long as his HOA fees did not go up. But I had enough. James prepared the formal notice for a special meeting, and we submitted it to Anderson Property Management along with the petition signatures. The special meeting was scheduled for January 10th, giving all residents proper notice as required by law. The purpose of the meeting was stated clearly: to present evidence of board misconduct and to vote on the removal of Patricia Donnelly and Karen Mitchell from their positions. The next 3 weeks were tense. Patricia and Karen knew what was coming. They sent out a letter to all residents claiming that I was a disgruntled homeowner spreading false accusations, because I was upset about a legitimate fine. They said the parking issues were being addressed and that I was preventing the board from doing their job by creating drama and distractions. Some residents believed them. I got a few nasty emails accusing me of being a troublemaker, but most people seemed to be waiting to see the evidence before making up their minds. During this time, something else interesting happened. Anderson Property Management finally produced the financial records, or at least some of them. James and I spent an afternoon in his office going through bank statements, income reports, and expense ledgers. What we found was fascinating. There was no record of any parking income. None. Not a single dollar was reported as revenue from parking fees or rentals. The HOA's income came entirely from monthly assessments paid by homeowners and occasional fees for things like architectural review applications or violation fines. The expenses were normal: landscaping, utilities for common areas, insurance, management fees, and reserves for future repairs. This confirms it, James said, highlighting sections of the financial report. Every dollar Patricia and Karen collected from those parkers was off the books. This is not just a civil matter anymore, Marcus. This is tax evasion and fraud. They are running an illegal cash business using HOA property. Should we go to the police? I asked. Not yet, James said. Let's see how the special meeting plays out. If they are removed from the board, we can pursue civil remedies and let the new board decide whether to file criminal complaints. But if they somehow survive the recall vote, then yes, we absolutely involve law enforcement. The night before the special meeting, I barely slept. I had compiled a presentation with video clips, a timeline of events, and a financial analysis showing the discrepancy between the parking activity and the HOA's books. James had prepared legal explanations of why the board's actions constituted misconduct. We were as ready as we could be. The special meeting was held in the community clubhouse, a modest building with a large multipurpose room that was usually used for birthday parties and baby showers. When I arrived at 6:30, 30 minutes before the meeting was scheduled to start, there were already about 50 people there. By the time 7 o'clock rolled around, the room was packed. I counted over 100 residents, which was an unprecedented turnout for an HOA meeting. Patricia and Karen sat at the front table, both looking composed but clearly tense. Patricia's husband, a quiet man named Tom who I had only met a handful of times, sat in the back row looking uncomfortable. Karen's husband was not there, which I found interesting. The meeting was called to order by Patricia, who retained her role as president until and unless she was removed. She went through the standard procedural opening, confirming that we had a quorum, and then turned to the agenda. We are here tonight because a petition was submitted calling for a vote to remove myself and Karen Mitchell from the board, Patricia said, her voice steady but cold. Before we proceed to any vote, I want to give Marcus Chen an opportunity to present whatever evidence he believes supports this action. Marcus, you have the floor. I stood up, feeling every eye in the room on me. I walked to the front where I had set up my laptop connected to a projector screen. My hands were shaking slightly, but my voice was clear. Thank you, Patricia. I want to start by saying that I take no pleasure in what I am about to present. I have lived in this community for 3 years, and I have always believed that our HOA, despite its flaws, was run by people who had the community's best interests at heart. Over the past few months, I have discovered that is not the case. I clicked to the first slide, which showed a map of our community with the parking areas highlighted. As most of you know, parking has become a major problem in Riverside Meadows. Assigned spots are regularly taken by unknown vehicles. Guest parking is always full. Many of us are forced to park far from our homes, despite paying $600 a month in HOA fees that are supposed to cover the maintenance and management of our community. Heads were nodding around the room. People knew this problem intimately. I started investigating why this was happening, I continued. I installed security cameras to document the parking situation. What I discovered was shocking. I played the first video clip. It showed Patricia meeting the man with the Honda Accord, accepting cash from him. The room was silent. You could have heard a pin drop. This is our HOA president, Patricia Donnelly, accepting cash from someone in exchange for allowing him to park in our community, I said. This is not a resident. I followed this individual, and he works at a tech company 3 blocks away. He is using our community as his personal parking lot. I played another clip, this one showing Karen conducting a similar transaction, then another, and another. By the time I had shown 5 clips, the room was buzzing with whispered conversations. Patricia stood up, her face flushed red. This is outrageous. You have no right to record people without their consent. This is illegal surveillance. James, who was sitting in the front row, stood up calmly. Actually, Patricia, Marcus has every right to install security cameras on his own property that capture activity in common areas. There is no expectation of privacy in a parking lot, and the recordings clearly show you engaging in transactions that benefit you personally at the expense of the community. Patricia looked like she wanted to argue but sat back down, her lips pressed into a thin line. I continued. Over the past 2 months, I have documented 27 separate cash transactions between board members and non-residents for parking privileges. I have identified over 30 vehicles that park in our community regularly but belong to people who work at nearby businesses, not residents. I clicked to a slide showing the financial records. I also requested and received the HOA's financial records. There is no income reported from parking, not $1. Every penny collected by Patricia and Karen went directly into their pockets. Based on my observations, I estimate they have collected at least $10,000 to $15,000 over the past year, possibly more. The room erupted. Residents were shouting questions, expressing outrage, demanding answers. Patricia was trying to call for order, but no one was listening. Karen stood up, and her face was a mask of indignation. You people do not understand how much work it takes to run this HOA. We volunteer our time, we deal with complaints, we make hard decisions. If we found a way to make a little extra money on the side, so what? It does not hurt anyone. That was a mistake. A huge mistake. She had just admitted to everything. James was on his feet immediately. Karen, I would strongly advise you to stop talking right now. What you just admitted to is a crime. You have personally profited from HOA assets without authorization, failed to report income, and breached your fiduciary duty to the homeowners. I suggest you consult with an attorney before you say anything else. Karen's face went pale as she realized what she had done. She sat down abruptly, looking at Patricia, who looked equally shocked. The meeting devolved into chaos for several minutes. Finally, one of the residents, an older man named Frank who had lived in the community for over a decade, stood up and called for order in a booming voice that silenced the room. Enough. We all heard the evidence. We all heard Karen admit to what they have been doing. I move that we proceed immediately to a vote on removing Patricia Donnelly and Karen Mitchell from the board for cause. I second that motion, said Maria Santos, the woman who had told me about being fined for her wreath. Patricia tried one last time to maintain control. We need to follow proper procedure. There should be an investigation, a formal hearing with both sides represented. You just had your hearing, Frank said bluntly. We saw the videos. We heard your vice president admit to taking money. There is nothing left to investigate. Let's vote. James stood again. Under Arizona HOA law and your community's bylaws, homeowners have the right to remove board members by a majority vote at a properly noticed meeting. This meeting was properly noticed. You have quorum. The vote can proceed. Patricia looked defeated. She called for the vote, her voice barely above a whisper. Ballots were distributed to all residents present. The question was simple. Should Patricia Donnelly and Karen Mitchell be removed from the HOA board for misconduct? Yes or no? The votes were collected and counted by 3 volunteers who were not involved in the dispute. The room was silent as they tallied the ballots. After about 15 minutes, Frank, who was one of the vote counters, stood up and read the results. Total ballots cast, 106. Votes in favor of removal, 98. Votes against removal, 8. The motion passes. Patricia Donnelly and Karen Mitchell are hereby removed from the board effective immediately. The room exploded in applause. Patricia and Karen gathered their things and left without another word, both looking like they had aged 10 years in the past hour. I felt a mix of relief, vindication, and sadness. This did not feel like a victory. It felt like the necessary amputation of something that had gone rotten. After Patricia and Karen left, the meeting continued. The remaining board members, who had not been involved in the parking scheme, took over. Arrangements were made to hold a new election for president and vice president. Several residents volunteered to serve on an interim basis. Then Frank spoke up again. We need to talk about what happens next. Those 2 committed crimes, they stole from us. Are we just going to let them walk away? James addressed the room. That is a decision for the new board and ultimately for the community. You have several options. You can pursue a civil lawsuit to recover the money they took. You can file a complaint with law enforcement for fraud and theft. You can do both. Or you can choose to move on and focus on fixing the parking problem and restoring trust in the HOA. There was a long discussion. Some residents wanted blood. They wanted Patricia and Karen prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law. Others were more concerned with just getting the parking situation fixed and moving forward. Eventually, the group reached a consensus. The new board would consult with James about filing a civil suit to recover the stolen funds, and they would also file a report with the Gilbert Police Department to let law enforcement decide if criminal charges were appropriate. The meeting finally adjourned around 10:30, 3.5 hours after it started. I was exhausted but also energized. People came up to me throughout the night, thanking me for having the courage to investigate and expose what was happening. Maria gave me a hug and said I had done the right thing. Frank shook my hand and told me I should run for the board. Over the next few days, things moved quickly. The interim board, led by Frank as the new president, sent a formal letter to all residents explaining what had happened and outlining the steps being taken to address the situation. They hired a company to install proper gates and access controls for the parking areas to prevent unauthorized use. They also conducted a full audit of the HOA's finances to ensure there were no other irregularities. James filed a civil lawsuit against Patricia and Karen, seeking to recover the estimated $15,000 they had taken, plus attorney fees and damages. He also filed a detailed complaint with the Gilbert Police Department, including all the video evidence and Karen's admission during the meeting. 2 weeks after the special meeting, on a cold January morning, I was working from home when I saw through my window 2 police cars pull up in front of Patricia's townhome. 2 officers got out and knocked on her door. Patricia answered, and after a brief conversation, she was placed in handcuffs and led to one of the patrol cars. An hour later, the same thing happened at Karen's house. I later learned that both women were arrested and charged with theft, fraud, and conspiracy. The charges stemmed from their systematic scheme to rent out HOA parking spaces for personal profit. The estimated value of what they had stolen was over $18,000, which elevated the charges to a felony level in Arizona. The arrests made local news. A reporter from the Gilbert Tribune came to interview me, and I explained the whole situation. The story ran with the headline, "HOA board members arrested for parking scheme." It got picked up by a few other outlets, and suddenly our little community drama was being discussed on local radio shows and social media. Patricia and Karen both hired attorneys. Karen's lawyer reached out to James about a possible settlement in the civil case. She was willing to repay the money she had taken in exchange for the HOA not pursuing additional damages. Patricia, on the other hand, continued to deny any wrongdoing despite the video evidence and maintained that she was being persecuted. The criminal case moved through the system slowly, as these things do. Both women were released on bond after their initial court appearances. The prosecution offered plea deals that would have involved restitution, probation, and community service, but Patricia rejected hers and insisted on going to trial. Karen, seeing the writing on the wall, accepted a plea agreement in March. The parking situation in our community improved dramatically once the new board took control. The gates and access controls were installed by February, and suddenly all the guest parking was available again. The regular vehicles that had been using our community as a parking lot disappeared overnight. I could park in my own assigned spots every single day. It felt like such a simple thing, being able to park at your own home, but after months of frustration, it was wonderful. The new board also implemented a transparent financial reporting system. Monthly financial statements were posted on the community website, and an independent accountant was hired to review the books quarterly. There was a real effort to rebuild trust and ensure that nothing like this could happen again. Patricia's trial was scheduled for late April. James told me I would likely be called as a witness, which was both exciting and nerve-wracking. I had never testified in court before. As the trial date approached, however, Patricia's attorney made a motion to suppress the video evidence, arguing that it was obtained illegally. The judge denied the motion, ruling that I had every right to install cameras on my own property, and that Patricia had no expectation of privacy while conducting transactions in a common area parking lot. With the video evidence intact, Patricia's case was pretty much hopeless. 2 days before the trial was set to begin, she accepted a plea agreement similar to Karen's. Both women pleaded guilty to felony theft and fraud charges. They were sentenced to 2 years of probation, ordered to pay full restitution to the HOA, and required to complete 200 hours of community service. They also had to write formal letters of apology to the community, though those letters were perfunctory and felt hollow. The civil case settled around the same time. Between the two of them, Patricia and Karen paid back just over $19,000 to the HOA, which included the stolen funds plus interest and a portion of the legal fees. The money was deposited into the HOA's reserve account and used to fund additional improvements to the community, including better lighting in the parking areas and repairs to some common area amenities that had been neglected. By the time summer rolled around, Riverside Meadows felt like a different place. The new board was responsive and transparent. People actually showed up to monthly meetings because they felt like their voices mattered. The parking situation was completely resolved. And I had become somewhat of a minor celebrity in the community, though I tried to downplay it. I had not set out to become the guy who took down the corrupt HOA board. I just wanted to park at my own house. Sarah and I got engaged in June, and we decided to stay in the townhome for at least a few more years. Despite everything that had happened, I actually liked living there once the HOA was functional and honest. Frank remained as board president and did an excellent job. Maria joined the board as treasurer and made sure every dollar was accounted for. Looking back on the whole experience, I learned a few things. First, trust your instincts. When something feels off, it probably is. Second, document everything. Those cameras were the key to proving what was happening. Without video evidence, it would have been my word against the boards, and I probably would have lost that battle. Third, do not be afraid to stand up for what is right, even when it is uncomfortable or scary. A lot of residents knew something was wrong with the parking situation, but I was the one who actually did something about it. I also learned that small-scale corruption is surprisingly common. After the story made news, I heard from people in other HOAs across the Phoenix metro area who had similar experiences. Board members abusing their power, enriching themselves at the expense of residents, retaliating against anyone who questioned them. It is a problem that does not get enough attention because people think of HOAs as minor community organizations, not realizing that they control significant assets and can make residents' lives miserable when run by the wrong people. The cameras are still up, by the way. The new board officially approved them after the fact, recognizing that they serve a legitimate security purpose. I still check the footage occasionally, though now it is just boring recordings of people parking in their assigned spots and going about their lives, which is exactly how it should be. One evening in August, I was grilling on my patio when Frank walked over with a beer in hand. He had become a good friend through all of this. "You ever regret it?" he asked, settling into one of my patio chairs. "Going after Patricia and Karen the way you did, it was a lot of stress." I thought about it for a moment, flipping a burger on the grill. "No, I do not regret it. I wish it had not been necessary. I wish the board had just been honest and done their jobs properly, but given what they were doing, exposing them was the right call." Frank nodded. "You know, a lot of people would have just complained and done nothing, or they would have moved out and made it someone else's problem. You actually fixed it." "We fixed it," I corrected. "You, Maria, James, all the residents who showed up to that meeting and voted to make a change. I just got the ball rolling." "Well, the community is better for it," Frank said, raising his beer in a toast. "To parking in your own spot." I laughed and clinked my beer against his. "To parking in your own spot." As the sun set over the Arizona desert, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, I felt genuinely content. The nightmare of the parking scheme was over. Patricia and Karen had faced consequences for their actions. The community was healing and moving forward, and I could park in front of my own house. Sometimes the smallest injustices, the ones that seem too petty to fight over, are worth standing up against. Because it is not really about the parking. It is about the principle that people in positions of trust should not abuse that trust. It is about communities being run fairly and transparently. It is about holding wrongdoers accountable, no matter how minor their crimes might seem. The whole ordeal had taken nearly 7 months from start to finish. From the day I first installed the cameras to the day Patricia and Karen accepted their plea deals. 7 months of investigation, documentation, confrontation, legal battles, and ultimately justice. It had been exhausting and stressful, but it had also been worth it. In September, the HOA held its regular annual election for board positions. Several new residents stepped up to run, energized by the reforms that had been implemented. The election had the highest turnout in the community's history, with over 60% of homeowners voting. The message was clear. People cared about how their community was run, and they were not going to let it be hijacked by individuals with selfish motives again. I was approached by several people who encouraged me to run for the board, but I declined. I had done my part. I wanted to get back to my normal life, my job, my relationship with Sarah, and my hobbies that had been neglected during the months of the investigation. Let someone else take a turn at community service. The story did have one unexpected positive outcome. After the news coverage, several other HOAs in the area reached out to James asking him to help them implement better oversight and transparency measures. He ended up developing a consulting side business advising HOA boards on governance best practices and helping communities avoid the kind of corruption that had plagued Riverside Meadows. He told me I deserved a finder's fee for launching his new venture, but I just laughed it off. By October, nearly a year after the parking problems had first become unbearable, life had returned to a comfortable normal. The weather was cooling down from the brutal Arizona summer, making it pleasant to spend time outside again. The community had a fall festival in the common area with food trucks and games for kids. It was well attended and genuinely fun, a far cry from the tense, divided atmosphere that had existed during the height of the parking scandal. I ran into Tom, Patricia's husband, at the grocery store one day. It was awkward, but he actually approached me rather than avoiding me. "Marcus, I wanted to say something," Tom said, looking uncomfortable but sincere. I did not know what Patricia was doing, I swear I did not. When everything came out, I was as shocked as anyone. "We are separated now. I could not stay with her after learning she had been lying to me and to everyone else for months." I did not know what to say. "I am sorry, Tom. I never wanted to hurt you or anyone else, I just wanted the truth to come out." "I know," Tom said, "and you did the right thing. She made her choices. She has to live with the consequences. I just wanted you to know that not everyone in that household supported what she did." We shook hands, and he walked away. It was a strange encounter, but it reinforced something I had been thinking about. When you expose wrongdoing, there is always collateral damage. Families are affected. Relationships are destroyed. People who were not directly involved get hurt. But the alternative, letting corruption continue unchecked, causes its own kind of damage. It erodes trust, creates resentment, and ultimately harms more people in the long run. As the year drew to a close, I found myself reflecting on everything that had happened. If someone had told me a year earlier that I would spend months investigating an HOA parking scheme, install security cameras to catch board members taking bribes, testify in legal proceedings, and ultimately help send 2 people to criminal conviction, I would have thought they were crazy. That was not who I was. I was a software engineer who liked playing video games and hiking on weekends. I was not some crusading activist or investigative journalist. But circumstances had forced me into that role, and I had risen to the challenge. Sometimes you do not get to choose your battles. they choose you. And when they do, you have two options: step up or step back. I was glad I had stepped up. Sarah and I spent New Year's Eve at home, just the two of us, watching the celebration in Times Square on TV. As midnight approached, she turned to me and smiled. "What a year," she said. "You brought down a corrupt HOA, became a local news story, and proposed to me. Not bad," I laughed. "When you put it that way, it does sound pretty eventful. Here is hoping next year is a little more boring." "I will drink to that," she said, raising her glass of champagne. As the clock struck midnight and we kissed, bringing in the new year, I felt genuinely optimistic. The parking nightmare was over. Justice had been served. The community was in good hands. And I had learned that ordinary people can make a difference when they are willing to stand up for what is right. The cameras stayed up, quietly recording the mundane daily activities of a functioning community. Cars parked in their assigned spots. Residents came and went. Life continued in its normal, uneventful rhythm. And that was perfect. In the end, the whole saga of the Riverside Meadows parking scheme came down to a simple truth: sunlight is the best disinfectant. Once the corruption was dragged into the light, exposed for everyone to see, it could not survive. Patricia and Karen had operated in shadows, conducting their cash transactions early in the morning or late at night, keeping everything off the books, counting on people's apathy and fear to protect them. But transparency and accountability won out. The video evidence, the financial records, the willingness of residents to show up and vote for change, all of it combined to end the scheme and restore integrity to the community's governance. I sometimes wonder what would have happened if I had not installed those cameras. Would someone else have eventually figured out what was going on? Would Patricia and Karen still be running the HOA, pocketing cash from parking spots while residents suffered? It is impossible to know, and ultimately it does not matter. What matters is that the problem was identified, documented, and solved. The legal system worked the way it was supposed to. The guilty were held accountable. Restitution was paid. And measures were put in place to prevent similar problems in the future. It was not a perfect outcome. The criminal sentences were light, basically just probation and community service. But Patricia and Karen both had felony convictions on their records now. They had to repay everything they stole, and they had been publicly shamed. That was something. More importantly, the community had learned a valuable lesson about vigilance and participation. HOAs only function properly when residents pay attention and hold their leaders accountable. Apathy creates opportunities for corruption. Engagement prevents it. As winter turned to spring and then summer again, completing a full cycle since the beginning of the parking investigation, I noticed something interesting. People parked in their spots, but they also talked to each other more. The scandal had actually brought the community together in an odd way. Residents who had never spoken before were now friends. People showed up to board meetings and volunteered for committees. There was a sense of collective ownership and pride that had not existed before. In July, the community held its second annual election under the new transparent system. The turnout was even higher than the previous year. Several good candidates ran for open positions, and the winners were people genuinely committed to serving the community. It felt like a real democracy, not a corrupt fiefdom run by a couple of petty tyrants. I finally took down the security cameras in August, more than a year after I had installed them. They had served their purpose. The evidence they captured had been used in court, and everyone who needed to be held accountable had been. There was no reason to keep recording anymore. The new HOA board had installed proper security cameras in common areas as part of their enhanced safety measures, so my personal cameras were redundant anyway. As I unscrewed the cameras from their mounts, carefully coiling the wires and packing them away, I felt a sense of closure. This chapter of my life was truly over. The cameras had been the key to everything, the tool that had allowed me to document the undeniable truth of what was happening. Without them, it would have been speculation and accusation. With them, it was proof. Sarah and I set a wedding date for the following spring. We decided to have the reception at a venue in downtown Gilbert, not in the Riverside Meadows clubhouse. Some memories are best left untouched by celebration. We were happy in our townhome, happy in our community, but we did not need to commemorate our marriage in the same place where I had confronted corrupt board members and watched a community tear itself apart before rebuilding. Life moved on, as it always does. The parking scheme became a story people told, a cautionary tale about HOA governance gone wrong and the importance of speaking up against corruption. New residents moved into the community and had no idea about the drama that had preceded their arrival. They just enjoyed the well-maintained grounds, the responsive board, and the available parking. Frank remained board president for another year before stepping down, satisfied that he had helped guide the community through its crisis and back to stability. Maria took over as president and did an excellent job, bringing her financial acumen and genuine care for the community to the role. The culture of the HOA had fundamentally changed from one of secrecy and control to one of openness and service. On a quiet evening in September, almost exactly 2 years since I had first noticed the parking problems, I sat on my patio with a beer and watched the sunset. Sarah was inside making dinner. The neighborhood was peaceful. A couple of kids were playing basketball in the common area. Someone was walking their dog. Cars were parked neatly in their assigned spots. It occurred to me that this was what I had been fighting for all along. Not drama, not attention, not even really justice, though that mattered. What I had been fighting for was this: the simple, quiet pleasure of living in a well-run community where people treated each other fairly and followed the rules. A place where you could come home after a long day and park in your own spot without hassle. A place where the people in charge actually cared about doing right by their neighbors. It was not glamorous. There were no medals or awards for exposing an HOA parking scheme, but there was satisfaction in knowing I had made a difference. The community was better because of what I had done. That was enough. As darkness fell and the stars began to appear in the Arizona sky, I raised my beer in a silent toast to justice, to transparency, to communities that work the way they are supposed to, and most of all to being able to park in your own spot. The end.